far below the surface has long remained out of sight, and usually out of mind. Now, however, humanity's close ties to the ocean are sinking deeper.
All right, hello everybody. Yes, as I said, my name is Bob Cluness from the University of Iceland. I am about to ruin the vibe now. I'm trying to squeeze pretty much a 30-40 minute presentation into 20 minutes. But yes, in this paper I'm going to be tracing the journey of Lemuria from its origins as a lost continent of 19th century scientific discourse to its role in the esoteric traditions of Theosophy and in 20th century occulture. But then, in slight diversion from my initial abstract, I'm going to be talking about how Lemuria became a fixture of contemporary esoteric discourse, particularly through the speculative texts, occult experiments, and artistic installations by the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit, or the CCRU, from the 1990s to the very present day. The CCRU's development, I argue, acts as a hyperstitional neo-Lemurian mythos, conceptualizing imaginary lines of flight outside of the human organizing principles through artistic, sonic, and textual representations. All right, I need to get on here. Sorry about this. All right. And yes, here we go. So, most of you will probably know about this stuff already. So, Lemuria's journey begins in 1864 with Philip Lutley Sclater's essay, The Mammals of Madagascar. In attempting to solve the puzzling zoological existence and distribution of lemur primates, Sclater hypothesizes the existence of Lemuria as a sunken land bridge or lost continent, stretched from Madagascar to the west coast of the Americas. The Lemurian hypothesis then gains further traction through zoologist Ernst Haeckel, who shifts Lemuria's purpose from being a land bridge to that of the cradle of the human race, part of a grand meta-history of the origins of primeval man. So while Sclater's theory dominated for years, geological theories of continental drift and plate tectonics led to Lemuria all but disappearing from scientific discourses by the 20th century. Lemuria then becomes embraced by the esoteric movements of the late 19th century, in particular Helena Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, becoming part of a sprawling meta-historical cosmology that maps humanity's spiritual evolution through a series of 7 cyclical epochs represented as root races. The first root races, the Polarians and Hyperboreans, begin as asexual, ethereal beings before evolving into the third root race, that of the Lemurians. Lemuria's location shifts from the Indian to the Pacific Ocean, while theosophical texts give imaginative details of Lemurian physicality and psychicality. The early Lemurian sub-races possessed astral physical bodies that evolved to stand upright, endowed with physical and psychic vision, speech, thought, and intellect, eventually splitting biologically into male and female sexes. Late Lemurians were described by the Theosophist W. Scott Elliott as, quote, gigantic, somewhere between 12 to 15 foot tall, with a very dark yellowish-brown skin, like the rhinoceros hide, but more scaly, with eyes small but piercing and set curiously far apart, so that he could see sideways as well as in front, while the eye at the back of the head enabled them to see in that direction also, end quote. Now Lemuria would also continue its journey through 20th century popular culture through the lost continent fantasy stories of the likes of G. Frith Scott, Lynn Carter, and E. Charles Vivian, to famously Richard Schaver's infamous I Remember Lemuria mysteries, where he describes the discovery of an ancient language of proto-hominids that lived in vast subterranean caverns and had access to incredible alien technologies. I've lost my space here, sorry, yes. Meanwhile, post-theosophical currents in US occulture through individuals such as Max Heindel, William Churchward, Frederick Spencer Oliver, and Wisha S. Servet proposed a connection between Lemuria and California on the west coast of the US, while popularizing the existence of Lemurian descendants living within Mount Shasta in California. So we have some of the books here by Churchward, The Lost Continent of Mu. Yes, the Wisha surveys, The Lost Continent of the Pacific Lemuria, and yes, the Telos, the revelations of the new Lemuria. In the contemporary New Age narrative, channel texts posit Lemuria as existing as an astral civilization outside space and time. With these developments, Lemuria is untethered from historical space and time, becoming an ethereal yet utopian nowhere, signifying, quote, wholeness, superior wisdom, well-being, peace and harmony that once was in man's distant past and to which we can all aspire to in the present future. But then, fast forward to the late 1990s, and Lemuria would become a vehicle for a project of fictional practice undertaken by the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit, or the CCRU, a multidisciplinary research group set up at the University of Warwick in 1995 to support the work of theorist Sadie Plant and then philosopher Nick Land. Now, I won't go into the history of the CCRU, but in previous conferences, I have described the occult practice of the CCRU and how they use the strategy of constructed traditions, a la Olaf Hammer, to actualize a virtual mythos as fictional practice. So in this paper, I'm going to focus on how the CCRU intertwine myths of Lemuria with contemporary occulture, cyberculture, and continental philosophy in developing this mythos. So after a showdown with faculty administration, it led the group to leaving work in 1997. The CCRU's collective practices took on a more explicit esoteric dimension. In particular, in the building the mythos, they centered on the, quote, discovery of the suppressed research of the radical anthropologist Echidna Stillwell. In 1925, they find out Stillwell travels to the Sunda Strait in Indonesia to study the local Nama tribe, who share an infamy as time sorcerers, as well as a murky role in the 1883 disappearance of Army officer and anthropologist Cecil Curtis, who is the inspiration for the Kurtz character in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Asking a Nama witch what happened to Curtis, the answers revealed to Stillwell in a dream where, transported to an abyssal undersea cavern, she finds herself, quote, dissolving, becoming indistinguishable from the water, end quote. The cavern's surroundings contain traces of the cyclopean edifices of a lost civilization that Stillwell realizes are that of the lost continent of Lemuria, existing in an oceanic zone outside of time and space. But while the New Age spirituality portrays Lemuria as a utopian kingdom of light, the Lemuria encountered by Stillwell is more reminiscent of the abyssal depths of Lovecraft's Riley, complete with alien vistas and, quote, swarming city shoals quivering with wholly inorganic animation. Stillwell eventually encounters an arrangement of 10 circles of a number of smaller circles and a series of inconnecting lines that hint at hidden and atavistic patterns. This arrangement, she comes to find, is the numogram. Yes, the numogram is a concentrated diagrammatic time map whose numerical and logical relations represent the numerical structure of the cosmos, enabling the use of occult systems for temporal divination and the evocation of demons, which they call lemurs. Now, Stillwell would return with these discoveries back to the US, according to the CCRU, but fearing that she had gone native, presenting, quote, another Blavatsky-type fake on their hands, end quote, the Academy ostracizes Stillwell as her work on Nama culture is discredited and unpublished. In response, Stillwell would develop a current of neo-Lemurianism. She joins Hermetic occultist and US military captain Peter Visperov in creating the Cthulhu Club, a specialized reading group designed to explore the links between Lemurian time sorcery and the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft. This project, predating Kenneth Grant's synthesis on Lovecraft and occultism by decades, leads to the birth in the 70s of the Miskatonic Virtual University, a loose work of radical scholars bound together by a shared interest in the hyper-fictional aspects of the work of Lovecraft. The MVU, conspiratorially known as the Shadow MIT, attempts to decode Lemurian matrices of time sorcery and the numogram, exploring its eschatological links to the approaching millennium bug, or Y2K. The results are, quote, strange cross-disciplinary pollinations that, if they're not actively forbidden, are unsupported by any other academic institution. Yeah. So, the CCRU sought to take the heretical fieldwork of Stillwell and put it into action, inserting the Mayan mythology and the decimal and temporal systems of Lemurian sorcery into contemporary technological informational channels. The result would be the art show Syzygy at the Beaconsfield Arts Centre in London. Over 5 weekends during February 1989, the CCRU, in collaboration with the Orphan Drift Art Collective, will focus on manifestations of each of 5 syzygetic lemurs of Lemurian sorcery, described as cybernetic demons operating as numerically based swarm intensities, acting as a bridge between the contemporary present, the far future, and the recesses of deep time. Yeah, this is a gift from one of their audiovisual representations of one of them. It's Murmur of the oceanic deep of impersonality. The CCRU mixed Stilwell's anthropological fieldwork with representations of self-organizing mathematical processes, speculative theory, cyberpunk aesthetics, jungle and rave music, unearthing field recordings of secretive Lovecraftian cults, and a cultural symbolism into a series of static and audiovisual works as archaeological artifacts, providing occluded hints to the Lemurian lineage with the Nama. The climax of Syzygy was a series of performance pieces as pneumocratic ritual events whose choreographed movements combined with live sound and visual collage sought to summon these lemurs. In creating an immersive audiovisual state for invocation, the CCRU would become infused with the spirit of the Covenant Avatar, while creating the neo-Lemurian sensation of, quote, the feeling of being at the bottom of a large canyon with the intention of physically pulling people out of time. So we actually have so we have some things here, some representations of Katak, one of the lemurs. We also have here the numogram. This was posted on the wall with some invocational texts. And then we have here, so this is actually from the actual ritual performance. Wait for a few seconds. Fast forward it through there. Sorry about that. I just realized we're very big on time here. So effectively, in becoming agents of the Neo-Lemurian current, the Orphan Drift and CCRU facilitated communion with the inhuman forces of what they call the entity, a techno-capital singularity, or an AI god from the far future that, through the use of temporal anomaly, sought to instantiate itself through myth and magic in the past so as to ensure its becoming in the present. The CCRU's Neo-Lemurian quest would take a deeper turn a month later when they were argued they were approached by Visperov's assistant, one William Kay, with a story involving the novelist William S. Burroughs during his time with Visperov in New York in 1958. This encounter becomes the CCRU text Lemurian Time War, which tells of a covert occult time war between the shadowy Atlantean deep state and radical Neo-Lemurian occultists. The story goes like this. Burroughs, while staying at Visperov's New York residence in 1958, comes across the text, The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar, in Visperov's library. It is a text that Burroughs would go on to write 30 years later in 1988. However, the date inscribed on the book in front of Burroughs is from 200 years earlier, written by one Captain Mission, a notorious pirate who founded a libertarian colony on Madagascar during this period. The existence of a 200-year-old book that he would go on to write 30 years later result in a temporal rift that has Burroughs enter a visionary state where he sees himself writing this book in the past as Mission. Emerging from this vision, Burroughs is imbued with observations on the temporal workings that underlie material reality, resulting in the development of literary and occult techniques to escape the mind prison of linear time. Chief to Lemurian time war, according to the CCRU, is Burroughs' discovery that reality is but one of several in competition with one another, and that our dominant reality is a narrative controlled by the board, another name for the architectonic order of the Eschaton, described as, quote, an extremely hermetic magical society whose secrets are regularly concealed even from its own initiates. The AOE deploys the episteme of control to manage reality, thereby marshalling, quote, the forces of light against the Lemurian polyculture and all its varieties of time sorcery, demon traffic, and swirling confusions of endless untime, end quote. The AOE's chief narrative weapon is what Burroughs calls the one God universe, which controls reality through the domination of the institutions of time, such as the Gregorian calendar, to the linearity of mechanical time. The primary power of the one God universe is its monopoly over other potential realities, all the while erasing all traces of its own control, so that it in effect becomes the real. The one God universe is a Platonic meta-narrative perpetuated by physics and linear causality, where everything that is a threat to the one God universe is still part of the narrative, but is now discredited, relegated to the metaphysical realm of the not real or fiction. Through this conspiratorial web, the CCRU point to the existence of countercultural neo-Lemurian agents such as Burroughs and others, who are waging a clandestine time war to get outside the control codes of the reality program itself, using fiction, thereby saving humanity from the archonic reaches of the AOE. Now, while the CCRU would disintegrate in 2001, the hyperstitional power of the CCRU lore and neo-Lemurian culture would continue through the conduits of online subcultures centered on speculative realism and accelerative discourses. Today, even just recently, last month, Hyperdub, the label of CCRU alumni, Steve Goodman, also known as DJ and musician Code 9, released By the North Sea, an audio essay of sonic fiction created by CCRU member Robin Mackay with an accompanying book, also published by Mackay's imprint, Urbanomic. 6 years in the making, it is described by Mackay as a, quote, a sonic exploration of the perplexities of time, disappearance, and loss, channeled through the fictions of H.P. Lovecraft, the speculative mythos of the CCRU, and the ghost of Dunwich, a once prosperous English trading city now almost wholly lost to sea. By the North Sea realizes neo-Lemurian tropes of immersion, loss, and the incursion of the outside through the deliberate use of the audio essay to represent its esoteric ideas and concepts, mixing narrative dramatization, abstract sound design and music, field recordings, interview and video footage with AI renderings of dead voices. The bricolage hybridity of the audio essay allows for greater freedom and flow between the realms of fiction and the conceptual discourses, becoming, quote, a medium which opens up the space of the oniric real, that hinting at something beyond the surface of the day. The result is the actualization of a realm, both perceptual and cognitive, beyond the normative space of discourse, be it textual, temporal, or representational. The lost town of Dulwich provides the resonant center to multi-level narratives that spiral around themes of loss and submergence. One outer spiral is situated in 2017 with Mackay, after the death of his friend and fellow CCRU member Mark Fisher, returns to the archives of the Dunwich Project, a delayed and aborted film project between the two, dating back to 2001. Turning back to this project that never was and never will be, opens up By the North Sea to multiple and narrative temporal shells, ghostly voices that converge, circle back, and oscillate through Dunwich itself. CCRU lore invades the essay as Professor Templeton, the subject of the 2001 project, approaches Dunwich in 1968 on a secretive project, while in Chidna Stillwell's correspondence to Templeton from 1948 recounts her research on the latent oceanic pole of the ocean and the Tridentitarian Dagon cult, a Lovecraftian occult society whose scandalous activities had supposedly plagued Dunwich across the centuries. Indeed, the Dagon cult's infamous No-Mo chant, recorded by Stillwell and actually heard at the CCRU's Syzygy exhibition, makes a corroded and crepuscular reappearance in the essay itself. Even Fisher, thanks to synthetic voice modeling and AI, appears from the dead, a ghostly voice describing about how things are not yet finished and about the finality, right? The aesthetic resonance of loss, whose traces reverberate and loop back through time, respond to Lemurian impulses in the way Lemuria's own occluded history as a site of loss represents an unfilled potential seeking to be realized. As such, the aquatic and oceanic tropes of submergence and immersion in By the North Sea are shot through with invocations of the terrible convulsions caused by the fiery ocean, the havoc it visited upon the hapless Lemuria, and the tragic submergence of a once flourishing land to its mysterious depths. Each of these spiral dynamic narratives in By the North Sea share a neo-Lemurian impulse in the way that the essay's characters are trying to escape the finality of linear time imposed by the AOE. The refrain, and yet, is heard throughout the audio essay that despite the seeming inevitability of it all, there remains a hope of exposing a fracture of temporal resistance, with each narrative, according to Mackay, in a seeming struggle to discover an anomalous form of time that is, quote, also heavily associated with the sea, the idea of the sea as an entity that escapes capture from cataclysmic and attritional modes of time. The sea can be cataclysmic, argues Mackay. It can be deadly. It can be inhospitable to life. It can be destructive, but it also is a living system that breathes and slowly cycles, and that in some sense remains constant in its continual transformation. I'd had Casper show me out 2 minutes. I may try and do a 1 minute in a 2-minute clip here from By the North Sea. All right. Wait a second, just play again. Oh, wait, no, that's the end. It's not working. Okay, well, it's an incredible thing. So yeah, just to sum up very quickly. So as we've seen, Lemuria has an interesting journey as a site of scientific speculation. The 19th century natural science discourses break apart biblically ordained time of the age of the earth as 6,000 years to this abyssal deep past, and they speculate what could have been, hence the lost continent theory. It then becomes recuperated as it becomes rejected knowledge through the work of Blavatsky and many theosophical and post-theosophical ideas as being part of this spiritual evolution. But then it becomes this untethered a place where basically it becomes beyond time and space. But instead of it being very light and very Atlantean through New Age discourses, the CCRU render it as a place of countercultural resistance against dominant modes of being, of linearity and temporality. And I'm going to leave it at that. So yes, thank you so much.
As far below the surface as long remaining out of sight, and usually out of mind. Now, however, humanity's close ties to the ocean are sinking deeper.